All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Q&A for this town. Thank you so much for joining us. And here is the writer, director, and star. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, I'm David White. Hey, thanks for being here. What a special time. I have chosen a country background for this particular Q&A. So it's, in fact, where part of the film was shot. It was where I'm sitting. So fun times.
That's perfect. And to our audience, don't forget you can submit questions to David through the Q&A portal on your screen. It's that little thing on the bottom. But here we go. First things first, congratulations on the movie. I adore it. I've seen it 4 times now. It is funny, it is touching, it is strange, and it is kind. That's what I love most about it is its kindness. But I want to know first and foremost, what is the inspiration for this film?
Well, I came back from London. I'd been in London doing a business course for 10 months and I hadn't made a film for a long time. And I actually came back and I was hanging out at my parents' house and I really wanted to make something because as I say, I hadn't made anything for 10 months. And so I am and have been a documentary maker in my past, so I have a lot of gear. And I was, I wonder if I can make film by myself just on the land. And so when I was thinking about that idea, I went and saw a friend of mine who's actually an ex-gang member, and he's got this really big scar on his face. And we were talking about how people cross the road when they see him. And I was thinking, oh man, the prejudice. He's a very nice guy, and I love him dearly. But there was this idea where I was like, oh, imagine the prejudice in a small town, and what would be the worst thing that you could do that would not only ripple your own life, but ripple the entire town. And so I was driving back to my parents' place, and there's these beautiful mountains over in the yonder, which you can actually see. And I was like, oh, if your whole family were murdered, like that would be a problem. And I always knew that Sean was innocent, and I always knew that he basically it would have a huge impact on him. But I also started to realize that it's something innately around this idea that if any of us lost a family member or our family and then we were accused of doing something, the true pain that would make you feel. And I was like, oh, that's something that we can all sort of relate to. And so I actually came back and I just wrote a 10-minute short film, which I shot by myself, which I would just set up the camera and then I would run in front of the camera and film myself. And I made basically a proof of concept, but that proof of concept went to like 50 film festivals around the globe. And then I was like, oh, I'm done with that. And I made a documentary. And then whilst I was making that documentary, I was like, oh, if I was going to make that into a feature, I know how to do the ending now. So I went to Henry's place, who lives in Dunedin, which is way down in South Island, and we wrote 40 pages in 4 days. And that was the kind of like, it all just started unraveling after that. And then we went to Venice, film the Biennale in Venice that got selected to that to develop it. And then the rest is kind of history.
Very cool. Yeah, I read about that. You developed the script over a 10-day workshop. Is that right?
Yeah. So I think we'd written 50 pages by that point in a treatment. And then we went to Venice for 10 days and the three of us developed it in that. And then I came back and then I wrote the rest of it in 3 weeks. And that's pretty much the script that you see today. So it was a really quick, it was a long process in regards of like I made the short and then it took another 2 years for me to decide to make a feature. But from the moment that I was like, oh, I've got the ending, it was actually a very short process to make it, or to write it at least.
Yeah. And you talk about, the script you wrote is basically what we saw. So that sort of answers my question. Character-based comedy like this, where you really get in depth with the characters, they feel improvisatory, but how much of this was actually improv?
Very little, actually. Like we talk about, Robin and I talk about it quite a bit when we released it in New Zealand and we were on tour. And there are nuances obviously that I wanted. So we would always have the script that I wrote Like I think there's a thing coming from a documentary background as well. I'd spent a lot of time rewriting people's lines to make them sound good, like you do in a documentary, right? Like it's a lot of editing words together and stuff like that. And so to get that kind of impro kind of feel, I wrote it pretty much like that. And then obviously actors always bring things to the table, and like that's kind of the beauty of it. Like then they would add stuff in and in, but we would always get the take that I wrote originally. And that was more to do with like when you make your first film, you are still trying to work out what you can get away with and what you can't. And if you've spent a long time on those scripts, you're like, well, I'm going to need every single thing in the script. And in lots of cases you do. But then you also, like, as the process went on, especially with Robin and stuff, who plays Pam, they add so much stuff to those scenes, but they would always come in. We had this thing on in while we were filming as well, because I really believe in empowering your crew and your people. And on the first day, because we all shot it on location, so we were all together in a small little place, living together. It was amazing. But on the first night, before we started shooting, I gave everyone an American dollar, and I said to every one of the crew that while we're shooting, if you come up with a joke and you pay me the dollar, I promise, as long as we're not crazy out of like time, I will film that joke for you. And then if the joke makes it into the cut, I'll give you back the dollar at the premiere. And because it was all about, like, if you're making a comedy, you're like, I want all the jokes from every person that I can possibly get them from. And so, and you want to empower, we had a small crew, we had maximum probably 20 people at any one day. And it's like, you want to empower everyone from the boom operator or the artist to heads of department to come up with jokes. So it was kind of this idea that even though we stuck to that script, I would constantly be searching for other people's inspiration. Because it's, comedies, another joke is another joke. You always want another joke.
We have a question from one of our viewers. Did you see the British miniseries White House Farm Murders, which is about a true story with a similar plot?
No, I've never heard of it.
All right, fair enough.
What's it called? White House
Farm Murders.
Oh, okay. Is it funny?
I don't know. It's a question for the audience. That's kind of one of the things I like about this movie. It's that it's a romantic comedy, but it's also very dark and kind of sad and kind of morose. You do a great job as the lead character. How did you find a way to balance the dark comedy with the sillier aspects, with the character beats, and make this a kind-hearted film?
Like, there's a really famous quote by Gene Wilder that says, which I use all the time still to this day, which is like, don't make it funny, make it true. And when you go into those situations, like small town, I come from a small town, as you can tell, like I'm literally on my parents' land. This is where I grew up. So I come from, like, these are the people from my town, and I love them dearly. Like, I love every character. Like, every one of those people are based on someone that I have met or have know, or a version of that thing. And so when you create a character, you're like, I'm like, well, if it's this big dark thing, but they're speaking their own truth, that is very funny. I didn't think it was as funny as it turned out to be. That's the irony as well for my life. Like, I thought I'd written something slightly darker, and it turned out, like, there are times where people are laughing at things that I was like, whoa, I did not expect you to laugh at that. But I was like, I guess there is a thing where if you write those characters, and in New Zealand, like we did the tour when we released it, and every one of these people in the audience, well, not everyone, but a lot of them would be like, no, that's my auntie and that's my cousin and I know that guy. And so they all really identified with these people. And I go, like, if you speak their truth in a way that is just slightly bent, and then just try and work out a way of making a joke into it, but at the same time keeping the truth of how brutal that murder is, you're able to fluctuate it well. And I think it's obviously worked out really well. Like, there is that amazing scene. I've just called scenes in my own film amazing, but it's my favorite. It's one of my favorites. It's like when the drone goes over the pine trees, and then she walks around that house and she reenacts that murder, and you're just like, oh man, that's so brutal. But then you're like, oh, now I understand everything, that why Pam is so obsessed with this thing. It's because she saw all of these things. And for a long time, actually, we did spend a long time both in that scene in sound design, trying to work out the perfect tone of the sound. Like, we even recorded screams, so like you could hear the screams of the murder victims, and then we recorded creaks and floors, and then we just started like peering that back. And then at the end of the movie, when she realizes it and you see the photos, the brutal photos, like there was a long, I think it was probably a long 3 weeks when I didn't know if I would add those photos in or not. And so it's decisions like that that really create that tone, I think. And there was a very different beginning as well, which we ended up not using. In fact, I shot the beginning twice because I didn't like the first 2 beginnings that I shot. I needed it to be lighter.
I get that. Yeah. The film has a really wonderful sense of location, and you just let us know why that is. Why did you choose to set the film in this place? This is Hawke's Bay, if I'm correct. Yes.
Yeah. One, because I grew up here. B, like I felt like it was sort of like a fairly untapped resource. Like there, you know, like one of the things for us, like we were fairly low budget. In regards to our budget, we were fairly low budget, and one of the things for me, coming from sort of that, as I say, that documentary background, is I was always like, if I write something with places that I know, and I know that's an old saying that people constantly use, you know, write what you know. But I was like, oh, there are so many amazing locations within this one place that really give a sense. Like, you know, for example, you know, the scene we just talked about with the chimney in the background with the house that's fallen down, that's like, we didn't build that. Like those are just around Hawke's Bay. And I was able to be here, like I was here for 2 or 3 months before we started shooting. And I would just call, you know, like acquaintances and be like, do you know where this is? And they'll be like, oh, I don't quite know, but my mate does. And so we were able to create these kind of insane places just from actual locations that were living and alive and around. And I don't think you can do that in many cities around New Zealand. Even like, you need to be really embedded in the community. And you know, like the local paper, which is like the Thistle Tatler, like literally would write articles for us every 3 weeks about what we needed in the lead up. They would do like casting calls for us. And so it became this really beautiful community project in a lot of ways, where people just didn't care what we did. They would, like, we closed down the main street by just holding our hands out and stopping cars whilst we got people to cross the street. And you can't do that anywhere else, basically. It sounds very quaint, but people in Waipaik were just like, yeah, just do what you want. And so in Hawke's Bay. And so there was this kind of thing where I knew that I would be able to take advantage of A, bringing a film crew, B, the community getting involved, and C, just that using all the different locations that haven't really been seen before out of this country.
Very cool. What led you to take the lead role? I was looking into your background. There is some acting. You started a theater company at 19, but why Sean?
Well, it's sort of a weird set of events, really. One, sort of not intentionally at the start. So when I had made the short film and that had done well, and I wrote the feature, I think there were people that had assumed that I would just take the main role, and I hadn't, like that's a big commitment. Probably bigger than I thought it was, to be fair. But one of the reasons that we ended up doing it is because I wrote that character as a country kid, or a country man who had all the abilities to cut down trees and do demolition derbies and shoot guns, which are all things that I can do and have done. I was like, oh, well, there'll be a person in the community that can do all that stuff. And then as we started to think about auditioning, we started to go through people's skills, and just people, actors, I probably should say, don't have those particular skills. And so we got to a place where the producers and I talked it over, and we were like, well, maybe I should just do it, because it seemed like I was probably the best pick, because of we just couldn't afford to train someone actually as well. And also I'd done the short, so everyone was happy with me doing it. Like everyone was like, well, you'll be able to knock it out of the park, it'll be fine. I probably had the most hesitation, to be honest, but just because, when you start to go down that process, you don't quite understand the workload. But in the end, I also just go, hey, it's what you've signed up to do, so you just do it, and it was fine. I think it's probably harder in a way for Alice in some cases to have your director also being your main part, who's your love interest, because because sometimes there would be scenes where I know that I wasn't getting my performance right, and I could just feel it, and it's quite hard to tell your opposite, hey, we've got to go again. And she's like, well, is it me? And it's like, no, it's really not. But there is an element of like, well, you're going again, and why aren't you getting it right? You're the one that wrote the film. You wrote it for yourself, ironically. Well, theoretically, you should be able to nail it every time. And so that's actually the hardest thing, was trying to negotiate kind of that relationship when I was not nailing it. When she was great, always, pretty much.
We have a question from a viewer. Can you talk more about the other beginnings you shot and why you ultimately did not use them?
Yeah, no problem. There was like one of the things that in hindsight I did wrong on the very first beginning was I basically made the short film, which I had already made, which you'll never be able to see because it's been taken off the internet and it's been behind many passwords, because now there's a feature. Maybe in a retrospective one day. I had basically made the short film basically the start of the feature. And then I had done Pam's, because it was like it was probably 25 scenes, and the shots would, look at me and I would explain who I am, kind of thing. It was very mockumentary style. And then I did that with Pam. And when we got to the cutting room, it just felt too, it felt like two characters that didn't really belong together, kind of like, it just didn't really work, to be honest. It was funny to me, but it was probably not funny to other people. And when we tested the film, I think people didn't really engage with the two main characters, which was the problem. And so I was like, well, that's just not really working. And it's a problem with going from a short to a feature, which, as I say, was never really my intention. And I haven't done that with my other films. It was just this one I had came up with such a good ending. I was like, oh, I think I can make that work. And the second ending, which is really great, and it's on some social media somewhere because we have used it. It was a car driving in. Oh, so you see a sign of Thiston, welcome to Thiston, and it's got the population down the bottom, and it says 2004 people, and then a car drives in. And then I think the tagline is a crime-free city. Yeah, so it's welcome to Thiston, a crime-free city, and then it's got population 2004. And then this car drives in, like a local council worker, gets out, changed the population from 2004 to 1,999, and then spray paints out the free, so it's a crime city, and then drives off. And it was very funny, but it just like it's as you can say, if you scroll this town's socials, you can find it. And it was there for a long time. And then I think, and this is actually, I don't mind talking about this now, for a long time during the edit as well, I probably was a little bit more reticent to make myself the main character. For a long time, Pam was probably more the main character than I, and it was more a whodunit than a romantic comedy, even though in the script, it very much was a romantic comedy. But there's a thing that happens, right? Like when you're in your own film, you don't really want to put yourself front and center because it looks like you're a wanker, basically. And so for a long time, I think my own subconscious had taken over and I had put Pam at the center. And it wasn't until halfway through the edit process when a friend of mine just went, David, this is not okay. Like you need to swap the storylines. It's like, this is your and Casey's story. It's always been your and Casey's story. Like that's the way through this. And then from there, I was like, how do you start a film like this? Oh, you do a dating video of Sean. And how would Sean do a dating video the way that he does it? And it also is quite nice because it sets up that kind of like two camera feeling. So it sets up this idea that you're going to see a person looking to camera. It's a funny opening because it's, funny. And then it kind of sets up that whole film and you understand it's Sean's story at that point. That's the hardest thing actually, is to turn it into my own story, which I probably don't think I've ever admitted to just about anyone until today.
Well, we're happy to hear it. So it's great. So you keep on talking about Pam. Let's talk about Robin Malcolm. So America knows her from Top of the Lake, which played big here. We love Jane Campion over here. But she's extremely famous in New Zealand. Outrageous Fortune, Shortland Street. Let's see what else. TV Guide's New Zealand's Sexiest Woman for 4 years in a row. Was she always your choice to play Pam?
Yeah, always. And fortunately, I just texted her. I didn't know her, but a friend of mine did. And I texted, she knew of me, like I'd met her probably at a party. And I just texted her and I said, hey, I've got a role. Are you interested? And she said, let's have a cup of tea. So we had a cup of tea. I told her it. She was like, sounds great. Let me read the script. Sent her the script, and the next day she was in. So it was a really simple exchange actually. Like she was very generous in lots of ways, and like we even changed our schedule for her because she got another really big role that she couldn't turn down in America, and so we had to split the filming into 2 roles. So I was like, by the time that I cast her, I was just like, you're it. There's no one else that I want to play this character. And it's, like it's fun for her, and she said it a lot. It's like for a lot of the roles in her life, she's played, kind of glammed up, leopard skinned, like Outrageous Fortune, especially in New Zealand. Whereas this, I was like, I want you to wear full khaki the whole time. You'll have to put makeup on to age you up because she doesn't look like that. She looks much, she's so beautiful. And so we spent a lot of time. People always like, oh, it must be so nice not to have worn makeup during this film. And you're like, I don't know what you were watching, but she's definitely got a lot of makeup on. But it was, like a very much a big departure from what she'd done in the past by her own admission, which was great.
Yes, we have heard a rumor from someone else in New Zealand that you are on a quest to make the perfect burger. Is this true? Do you have tips for us? Do you have a story for us? Is there a chronicle of the perfect burger?
Yeah, so I have a burger pop-up called God Burger as well, which I do when people ask me very politely or at my friends' restaurants. And so it's basically for a long, the musicians in my film, so the people that make the music for all my films are a band called Monica, and the lead singer of one of the lead guys, well, one of the guys is Sam Scott, who's also in a very famous band in New Zealand called the Phoenix Foundation. And for about a year, I had been trying to make a burger, and I thought I'd cracked it. And he turned up at my house, and I said, I've cracked it, Sam. I'm going to make you the perfect burger patty. And so I made him this burger patty, you know, with caramelized onion in it and prosciutto and all these different things. And then he said, that's not a burger, that's a meatball. You've made a meatball sub. And I said, I don't believe you, Sam. He's like, no, all you want to do is you just want like 100% beef, salt, and then just like a smash burger. And so from that moment, Sam and I actually have been making the God burger, which is two patties, 2 slices of cheese, God sauce, onions, and then on a burnt mayo bun. So the trick to the best burger actually is you get mayo and you put mayo on the bun, and then you put that bun onto the grill, like the fire part of the grill, and you burn the mayo into the bun, and then the patty and all the other things. And you also use plastic cheese. You use like pre-made Cheesdale slices. That's how you make the perfect burger. So yeah, we've got the God burger, which is a double patty. We've got the baby cheeses, which is a single patty. And we've got, what else have we got? The Immaculate Conception, which is the vegetarian burger. And we've recently added lettuce pray, which has got lettuce in it. It's a whole thing. It's like one of my many careers. There was a burger sauce for a while, not a burger sauce, a barbecue sauce for a while, which still gets made. These wood things.
That's great. And I know that does that relate at all to, you made a documentary called Meat about farmers. Does that tie in any way?
The barbecue sauce did, because when we released the film Meat into cinemas, my publicist, I was talking to her about the barbecue sauce, and she says, you should release the barbecue sauce when the film gets released. And again, this is how you get yourself into a situation where you're acting in your own film and you just don't say no. I was like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. And so I started mass producing barbecue sauce whilst also trying to release a film. And so I would literally go from my office upstairs. We had a commercial kitchen downstairs in our offices in Wellington. And I would go downstairs and I would make batches of barbecue sauce. And then we would go to like supermarkets, and we would take the poster of the film of Meat and we would put it behind me whilst I sold barbecue sauce. Like, it was insane. Like, it's not an okay thing to do. That's actually just nuts. Like, you definitely should not be like, hey, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to start an entire new business whilst also I'm trying to release this other business over here, whilst also trying to write another TV show. Like, it was a massive amount of work. It's ultra fun though. And that sauce still gets bought. Like, people still, like, I make a batch a year and then people buy it and then it's done. And that's your yearly batch of, it's called David's barbecue sauce, because I couldn't come up with anything better.
Perfect name. We have another question from our viewers. Why did you decide to put the scene revealing the murderer in the middle of the wedding scene?
Tension. Why did I decide to do that? Here you go. Because if you when you're writing a story like that, you know, obviously, you know, that his lines that he's writing, you know, like his vows, basically are talking about the way in which he felt about him being innocent, and about how no one believed him, and about how this is the only person. And then if you juxtapose that against the person that's absolutely sure that it was him, and then she finds out it's actually her nephew, sorry, the much greater. It becomes like, it basically becomes a thriller, you know, at that point, because you're like, well, who did do it? Right, we're going to find out, and we're going to find out during this entirely touching moment. And there's another thing that also, you know, when the mother of Casey gets up and she crosses the aisle and she sits back down on the other side from him and hers, it's like at that moment, the mother also, without knowing that this person has been arrested, she, you know, the tide is turning, and it is because of Casey's love. So there's a niceness around, like, when you see those moments, you're like, oh, actually, maybe Casey's right all along, and these people are actually starting to cross over and believe him, just like the daughter does. Because there's a thing for me, which is like Casey is my favorite character of the entire film. And she is the epitome of what I think we as humans should all like, not necessarily the naive part, but definitely the part where she doesn't judge a book by the cover, where, you know, something, you know, like in our constant life, and I know that there are variations of this that you can talk about, and there's things that you could say that I'm wrong about, but there is a thing around going, man, I've met this person. I know that there's all this information around him, but maybe I should just work this out for myself. And she does find it in her heart to try and work out all of the things around this human that no one else really has, since, you know, Janice and Pam have decided that is it. And so from my point of view, I've always been like, oh, she's my favorite. And I wish that I could even be more like her. Like, because it's very hard to be that nice all the time and to try and find out and do all those things. But yeah, so that is actually the reason why it's between that. And I think it would be weird to cut it any other way now. I don't think we ever did. I think that's the way we cut it really originally. The only thing that really changed through that entire sequence from the very second edit was probably the pictures, and at what point you see those pictures of all the dead bodies. Oh, and the flashback. And there was a lot of debate about whether that flashback should be in the film or not. Like a lot, like weeks of fighting, of heartfelt conversation with producers and investors and me and my editor. And I made a lot of people watch the film with it and without it to work out what to do. But obviously it ended up, and so I decided that was the best way.
Absolutely. What's really nice about this film, it's a lot of movies are about somebody trying to achieve greatness, but this movie is about somebody trying to return to something normal. Is that something that was very important to you? This movie is, at least for Americans, this is a different look for a New Zealand film. We don't usually see anything outside of the cities or outside of a fantasy film from Peter Jackson. Was that something you really wanted to show the world and to show your home country?
Yeah, there's a few things, right? One of them is, did you say there's not many films where people aren't trying to create greatness? The word cut out.
Oh yes, most movies are about people trying to achieve greatness or something else, but Sean is just trying to return to something normal, and that's what's really special about this movie.
Yeah, I agree, and I also semi-disagree, because I don't think that you going back to trying without a family that's been murdered is ever normal. I think it's very extreme. I think it's the most extreme thing that could happen to you as a human. Well, you know what I mean? Like, as in, like for me in my situation right now, that would be a very extreme situation. Like, there are obviously other extremes. And I think, you know, there was lots of things. For example, I wanted to set it in the country because it makes it a small community, which is where I come from. B, I think we shot it in summer, which was an absolute decision. Like, I didn't want to shoot it in winter. I didn't want to drain out any of the color. I wanted it to feel like when you watch that film, like I'm always sort of quite interested in this idea that when you have a dark subject matter, it's always, the color is always really drained out and it's always desaturated. And I've always been kind of fascinated with this idea that actually really shitty things happen in bright sunlight and blue skies, and life goes on no matter what the season. And so I really wanted to show kind of like this very dark sort of subject matter in the heat of summer. And it was pretty funny. Like, there was certain scenes where it was overcast and people would be like, oh man, you must be really happy because it'll really help the tone. And I was like, no, this year, like in Hawke's Bay summer, it's like blue skies. Like, it's, you know, like imagine that behind me, but it's all blue. And then the grass is all yellow. Like, it's crazy. It gets hot and dry. And for the first year in 15 years or something, we had the wettest summer while we were shooting the film. And so it was like green. And like the farmers were coming to us and being like, can you shoot a film every year? Because like, this is insane. And so I kind of, like I wanted to keep the color of kind of the brightness whilst having that dark subject matter, which obviously also helps with the comedy elements, because obviously you want it to be, slightly brighter for a comedy. So sort of to ramble on a bit and not really quite answer your question. Yeah, I think those small moments in people's lives are quite relatable. And I think, a relationship of a young couple is quite relatable. I think we all, when we start dating someone, you learn a thing about that person. And I've, taken it to the extreme with Sean and Casey, but it's like you do learn things about the other person, and you have to really sort of like work out your own path through those things. And I think those things are actually ultra fascinating and interesting as humans. And then in regards to the New Zealand stuff as well, like this is my New Zealand. This is how I grew up. I might be wearing a paisley shirt now and designer glasses, but I can also shoot a shotgun and ride the quad bike. So it is a part of New Zealand that I don't think is seen enough of, actually.
That's wonderful. And we're glad to see it. And here's the final question that everybody always gets asked at one of these. What's next for you? Do you have any projects coming up?
I've just finished writing a TV series, which hopefully will go in the next few weeks, which will be really nice. So it's 6 episodes. It's based on a true story. In broad strokes, it's about a giant meth deal that went really wrong, and it's also a comedy. So it's a comedy TV series based on a terrible drug. So I feel like there's a theme coming through in my work. But yeah, there's that, and then there's another couple of movies, but they're still kind of more in gestation than fully formed ideas that want to go. So yeah, that's the goal at the moment.
That's awesome. And I think we've run out of questions from the audience. So I wanted to say thank you so much for giving us This Town. It's a wonderful film. People can keep watching it through the 18th. And everybody in the US, because it's geo-blocked, but get a VPN. I don't know. But thank you so much for having us. Thank you for making this, and thank you for talking to us.
Hey, no, thank you so much for having the film. It's so nice to talk to you, Marcus, and hi to everyone in Seattle. And thanks for watching the film.
All right. Enjoy your farm and take care.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Cheers, bro. See ya.